Imagine this. You're the Queen of France, married to young King Louis VII, a man with the pious face of a monk and the charisma of a lukewarm sermon. You're Adelaide of Savoy, noble, wealthy, beautiful, and unusually for the 12th century, educated. You've produced an heir. You've done everything by the book. And then one day, your husband publicly declares you an adulteress, claims you've betrayed him with none other than the Bishop of Senlis, Luc de Boissy. Thus begins one of the most scandalous royal dramas of the Middle Ages. And this isn't just a tale of bruised egos, it's a snapshot of a France teetering between spiritual authority and royal power. Bishops waged subtle war against kings, the Pope often outweighed the monarch, and a woman's virtue? That was stronger currency than silver. Thus begins one of the most scandalous royal dramas of the Middle Ages. And this isn't just a tale of bruised egos, it's a snapshot of a France teetering between spiritual authority and royal power. Bishops waged subtle war against kings, the Pope often outweighed the monarch, and a woman's virtue? That was stronger currency than silver. So the king, backed by the church, obliterates his wife's reputation. She is not only unworthy of my bed, he implies, but she has dishonored the throne. And what happens to Adelaide? She is thrown out of court, publicly. Her alleged affair with a high-ranking clergyman becomes royal gossip. And when she tries to protest her innocence, no one listens. In 12th century France, a woman's word meant nothing, especially against a king's, when the church was ready to nod in agreement. Subscribe to our channel if you love deep, slow-burn historical stories. And tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? We'd love to know how far across the world our stories travel. Adelaide's story isn't just a romantic tragedy, it's an indictment of the age. Could a woman preserve her dignity when the very system was designed to break her? To grasp the scandal that engulfed Adelaide of Savoy, we must step back into the chaotic mosaic of the 12th century, a time when marriages weren't unions of hearts, but diplomatic arrangements soaked in dowries, geopolitics, and ecclesiastical gamesmanship. Adelaide was no minor noblewoman. She came from the powerful House of Savoy, one of the most influential dynasties, connected to the imperial circles of the Holy Roman Empire. Her marriage to Louis, the future King of France, was arranged in 1137 with a clear purpose: to secure an alliance between the French crown and key Alpine territories. In essence, she was not so much a bride as she was a geopolitical adhesive. Louis VII, for his part, was never meant to be king. That role was destined for his older brother, who died unexpectedly. Raised in a monastery, Louis thought like a monk, steeped in fasting, prayer, and religious fervor. When the crown landed on his head, he entered the whirlwind of royal politics utterly unprepared. At first, the marriage between Adelaide and Louis was cold, but functional. She bore a daughter, Marie, fulfilling her dynastic duty. But for Louis, that wasn't enough. He wanted a son. More than that, he wanted a queen who mirrored his ascetic piety. Adelaide, refined, educated, with deep Roman ties, was far too worldly for his taste. Enter Bishop Luc de Boissy, a close royal advisor, an intellectual, a theologian, and, rumor had it, an overly attentive listener to the Queen's evening conversations. Factions at court, hungry for influence, began to whisper, "There's something going on." And Louis believed them. Then came the formal accusation, public, unsupported by evidence, but backed by the church. In a society where women could be burned for a mere suspicion of sin, Adelaide was doomed. The church, always eager to assert its authority over the monarchy, seized the moment. They sided with the king, reinforcing the message that only meek, God-fearing queens had a place beside the Lord's anointed. Adelaide, politically inconvenient, independent, proud, was a threat. She was expelled. She vanished from court, from chronicles, from her throne, but not from history. Her daughter Marie would go on to play a role in French aristocracy, and Adelaide herself would remain a symbol of how much a woman's dignity could cost in a world ruled by God, but spoken for by men. In the 12th century, marriage was not a sacrament of love. It was a pact between clans, crowns, and bishops. Ironically, the church, which preached marital fidelity, was often the driving force behind dissolving unions. In Adelaide's case, it wasn't witnesses, evidence, or even the king himself who sealed her fate. It was the clergy who saw in her downfall an opportunity for control. Louis VII wasn't the uncontested ruler of France, at least not in practice. The country was far from centralized, and the Pope held a kind of power that modern heads of state could hardly imagine. In the 1140s, the Church wielded not just moral authority, but also political clout. It could annul marriages, excommunicate monarchs, bless wars, or in this case, endorse a royal divorce. Their approach was subtle and surgical. Rather than condemning the king for slander or adultery, the Church reframed the issue as one of an unfruitful union. Adelaide had borne only a daughter, and for a medieval dynasty that spelled near apocalyptic crisis. Then came the ace up the ecclesiastical sleeve, spiritual consanguinity. This legal sleight of hand allowed the Church to annul any marriage on the ground that the couple were related, even distantly, say, in the 7th degree. And if no blood tie could be proven, one could always discover a shared godparent or ancestral link. No scandalous proof against Adelaide was ever presented. But Pope Clement III declared the divorce legitimate. The official wording was pious and politely cruel. The couple were respectable, but their union was incompatible with divine law, a verdict that contained everything except justice. And so, Adelaide lost not just her crown, but her right to be heard. History doesn't even record her reply, not because she was silent, but because no one listened. In an age when men negotiated crusades and crowned emperors, a woman, even a queen, could be removed from the chessboard the moment she disrupted the game. The royal court of the 12th century was no romantic setting of tournaments and feasts. It was a battlefield, not of swords, but of whispers, alliances, and silent executions. In this arena, Adelaide of Savoy, first wife of Louis VII, found herself both queen and target. After giving birth to a daughter, Marie, in 1145, courtiers began murmuring openly, a marriage without a son was a doomed marriage. But it wasn't only about the lack of an heir. Adelaide possessed qualities that unsettled those around her: intellect, political connections, confidence. In an age where a queen was expected to be demure, Adelaide was anything but. Among the most influential figures shaping Louis's view of his wife was Abbot Suger, a towering advisor and architect of the French monarchy's ideology. He envisioned the king as a divine ruler and the queen as a mirror of Christian humility. Adelaide's imperial ties and worldly disposition clashed with that ideal. Another key player was Theobald II of Champagne, a powerful noble and political rival. His family was at odds with the House of Savoy, and undermining Adelaide's position through rumors of adultery would have served his interests well. Allied with clerical factions eager to control royal marriages, the attack became both political and spiritual. And then there was Bernard of Clairvaux, saint, reformer, and spiritual heavyweight. His correspondence shows he supported the idea of annulment when a union failed to meet divine expectations. He didn't need proof of adultery. A lack of harmony was enough. In such a climate, Adelaide's every move was weaponized against her. Her dignity was read as defiance, her silence as guilt, her intelligence as danger. The court, like a finely tuned machine, began to squeeze her out, not through trials, but through the quiet machinery of exclusion. And this is no metaphor. Adelaide was quite literally removed from court, her presence erased, her voice silenced, her place soon filled by figures more agreeable to the king and his clerical handlers. When one royal marriage collapsed, another was already waiting in the wings. In medieval France, a new queen wasn't just a new partner. She was a political signal. The old order was over. A new one had begun. After Adelaide's exile, King Louis VII would marry twice more, and his lineage continued with Philip II Augustus. And decades later, France plunged once again into a scandal centered around the royal bed. Isabel of Hainaut, wife of Philip II, became the target of a smear campaign in the 1190s. She was accused of being the daughter of an actress, a term that, in medieval parlance, had nothing to do with theater as art. It implied moral impurity, promiscuity, and social disgrace. This stain on Isabel's background cast doubt not only on her own virtue, but on the legitimacy of her children, most notably the future King Louis VIII. The accusations were spearheaded by Gautier de Châtillon, Walter of Châtillon, a court poet and cleric. In one of his Latin epics, he insinuated that Isabel's mother lacked proper piety. At the same time, rival noble factions, particularly those aligned with the Duchy of Lorraine, eagerly amplified the rumors to undermine the House of Hainaut. Monastic chroniclers joined the chorus, led by William of Newburgh, who included the gossip in his writings. This is a textbook example of how politically motivated slander could become historical fact when inked by an ecclesiastical pen. But this time, the scandal didn't spiral out of control. King Philip II Augustus, unlike his father Louis VII, stood firmly by his wife. He not only rejected the accusations, but reportedly banned the dissemination of writings that defamed her name. Some accounts even suggest that Gautier de Châtillon was temporarily removed from court. This episode highlights how easily a woman's reputation could be destroyed, and how rarely anyone stepped in to defend her. In Adelaide's case, silence reigned. In Isabel's, her husband's intervention made the difference between disgrace and survival. In both, the same rule applied. A queen's fate rested not on truth, but on the will of her king. In the modern world, divorce is often a legal process, sometimes painful, sometimes liberating. In the 12th century, it was a political execution. You might not lose your head, but you could lose your place in history. That's what happened to Adelaide of Savoy. Her marriage was annulled not out of love lost, but out of dynastic expediency. And the annulment didn't just remove her title. It branded her in the chronicles as a woman who had failed. After her official separation from Louis VII in 1152, Adelaide vanished from court and, notably, from French historiography. Chroniclers barely mention her again. There are no records of her later life, no attempts at rehabilitation. She was deleted as a political entity. That silence is perhaps the loudest testimony to how efficiently the machinery of historical erasure operated. Louis's divorce from Adelaide was the first of three, a pattern that shaped his legacy as a monarch who wielded marriage like a political tool. After her came Eleanor of Aquitaine, whose union with Louis was meant to bring him the richest lands in Europe. That, too, ended in failure. Then came Adele of Champagne, and only with this third wife did Louis finally produce an heir, the future Philip X Augustus. Thus, Adelaide's dismissal was not just personal tragedy, but part of a broader strategy, women as bargaining chips in the game of power. And a queen's reputation, a resource to be spent or discarded when it no longer served its purpose. It's worth noting that medieval annulments were legally complex. The church required proof of marital impediment, consanguinity, impotence, or other divinely sanctioned grounds. But in practice, the Pope could grant anything if politics called for it. In Louis's case, his participation in the Second Crusade, his tumultuous relationship with Eleanor, and mounting clerical pressure all created a context in which divorcing Adelaide looked less like abandonment and more like a holy necessity, but not for her. For Adelaide, it meant erasure, and for history, it became a cautionary tale that queens could be discarded as easily as treaties, and love had nothing to do with it. In the story of Adelaide of Savoy, there is no final act of mercy, no redemption, no songs sung in her name. She vanishes, a shadow of a woman who once wore a crown, and now not even her portrait survives. And in that silence lies the true tragedy, not because she was unloved, but because she was made guilty of no longer being needed. 12th century France called itself the Kingdom of God, but it operated like a corporation. A queen had a function, reproductive, political, ceremonial. If she failed to meet expectations, she was replaced, like an outdated tool. And Adelaide, with her independence, intellect, and noble power, was dangerous. She irritated the men around her because she refused to play a role. She insisted on being herself. That alone made her guilty. Perhaps the greatest irony of this tale is that nearly every figure who orchestrated her downfall would eventually fade or fail. Louis VII, remembered by contemporaries as pious but weak, is known today largely as the man who lost Eleanor of Aquitaine. The church, which supported his annulment, would go on to lose numerous battles over secular power, and France itself, within a century, would descend into succession crises, fueled by the ambitions of the very heirs of those who once humiliated Adelaide, yet her name endures as a warning, as historical proof that in an age that preached God but operated on fear, to be a woman was to justify your worth daily and still lose, not because of wrongdoing, but because of the system. Because this story isn't fiction, and it isn't Shakespeare. It's a tragedy, documentary in nature, and all the more haunting because it truly happened.